In 2011, the Nintendo Wii was coming to the end of its life cycle. It was outdated, with no HD capabilities, and had hardware that was obsolete even when it launched. However, 2011 was also a special year for Nintendo as it marked the 25th anniversary of The Legend of Zelda. 25 years, 16 mainline games, and 3 separate timelines had spanned this renowned franchise from 1986 to 2011. To celebrate, Nintendo held concerts around the world, released a book detailing the creation and the lore of the series with the Hyrule Historia, and of course, most importantly, made a game. One that told the story of how the world of Hyrule came to be and how the legend was born. My journey continues as I skydive into The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. Hello everyone, I'm Phil, and welcome back to the Pixel Tavern. It's great to see some of you leaving comments on my previous videos and then getting to interact with you. So please leave comments on this video and subscribe to the Pixel Tavern if you haven't already. It's time to move on to the 16th game in the series with Skyward Sword, a game that fulfilled my motion control dreams of doing this in real life and having Link do it on screen too. It's time to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Zelda with the story that started it all. As usual, there are full spoilers ahead. First releasing in Europe on November 18, 2011, and then within a week everywhere else, Skyward Sword was the first Zelda game to come to Europe before any other region. I purchased the limited edition, which came with a CD containing several songs from the 25th Symphony Orchestra Tour, something I had the pleasure to go to in 2015. It also came with a gold Wii Remote and Wii Motion Plus included, an absolute steal at what I'm pretty sure was only £40 back then. Then on 16th of July 2021, a HD remaster was released worldwide for the Nintendo Switch, which is the version I used for this playthrough. It came with nothing but the game for £50. If you wanted the special edition Joy-Con, you had to fork out around £70 more for them, which of course, being the nerd I am, is exactly what I did. The original release also had a charming advertising campaign. As Nintendo had done the previous year with Ocarina of Time 3D, they hired the late great Robin Williams and his daughter Zelda Williams to do a few adverts for Skyward Sword. I remember these airing back in the day, and it was nice finding them again for this video, just to enjoy seeing Robin Williams back on screen for a while. Nintendo has a history of adverts with celebrities, from Rick Mayall advertising Link's Awakening, Paul Rudd in an early Super Nintendo advert looking, well, pretty much exactly the same as he does now, and even one I forgot about, Brian Blessed lending his voice to do a Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze advert. These adverts are great, but the ones with Robin and Zelda Williams are my favourites, as they show such a clear love of the series from these two, which makes them feel less like adverts and more just like two people sharing their experiences with the franchise. Anyway, on to the actual game. Skyward Sword is definitely one of the most polarising in the series, and that comes down almost entirely to its gameplay and controls. It all kicked off in 2009, where Nintendo first teased the game with this concept art, showcasing a very dark and sketchy art style and a mysterious new character. That same month though, we got a tease of what the gameplay would be like as Nintendo released the Wii Motion Plus adapter for the Wii Remote alongside Wii Sports Resort, a game designed to showcase the exciting capabilities of this new more advanced motion technology with one-to-one sword fighting, archery, and more. This new technology got fans excited at the prospect of a full one-to-one motion-controlled Zelda game, and it turns out Nintendo was excited too. So Skyward Sword was developed entirely around it, but this is where the core controversy of the game comes from. You see, even with Nintendo's fancy new Wii Motion Plus, a lot of people just didn't get along with the motion controls. For better or worse, they were used to the fullest across all items in the game, your shield, and even for swimming, which admittedly was kind of pointless. Most importantly though, they were used for full one-to-one sword combat. Gone are the wacko controls and the different moves of Twilight Princess, except the finishing attack, and instead you must fight your enemies with precision and by paying attention to their attacks and defense to counterattack, and to parry with your shield at the right time. Personally, I found these controls to be great. When I first played, I found them to be nearly faultless. I was getting none of the issues others were complaining about, only having to resync on occasion. It was so much fun having full one-to-one motion controls as well, something I'd wanted since 2006 when the Wii launched. I feel Nintendo really delivered on their promise here, and if you got along with the controls as well, I imagine you might feel the same way. Other items such as the bow and the whip are intuitive and fun to use. The bomb rolling was fun too, and the flying beetle, although slow, I did find some enjoyment in, and I did so with my playthrough for this video as well on the Nintendo Switch version. The items in general are pretty strong here. There's only a few of them, so they all get used pretty frequently. And although the slingshot and the bow are basically the same thing, they do both get used for different scenarios. The items are also used in a unique way for the series in that they are swapped out in real time, so there is no pausing into menus to select another item. Sadly though, many people just didn't get along with the controls, and that is why this game is often cursed for its motion controls. Thankfully though, the HD version includes a fully button-controlled option, stripping the game entirely of its motion controls except for aiming, but even that is optional. Personally for me though, I didn't find the game quite as fun without the motion controls. I swapped multiple times during my playthrough for this video, and still always found myself leaning back to the motion controls. Using the right analog stick for the sword attacks was functional, but just wasn't as immersive. So, if the controls were the problem for people, and the HD version fixed that, then why isn't Skyward Sword universally loved now? Well, that's because of the other controversy around this game, which comes from its gameplay. But before I can really go over that, we need a bit of story first. And this is one area that I think most will agree is fantastic. Years before the events of Skyward Sword, the goddesses created the world. But there was another goddess, Hylia, who protected that world, its inhabitants, and the Triforce they left behind. One day, all of the demons and evil of the world broke free from the earth and fought to steal the Triforce, with the Demon King Demise leading them. In order to stop him, save her people, and protect the Triforce, Hylia sent them into the sky on a piece of land she had pulled from the earth. She fought back Demise alongside her chosen hero and sealed the Demon King away. However, she knew that her seal would not last forever and that she needed the Triforce's power to stop him for good. As a goddess though, she could not use the Triforce, and so she chose to give up her immortality to be reborn as a human so that she could one day rid the world of the evil that had been released. Generations later, the goddess Hylia is reborn as Zelda, and the chosen hero is reincarnated as Link on the land she separated from the surface, which is now known as Skyloft. The people here traverse the skies by flying around on huge birds known as Loftwings. They still follow the ceremonies of Hylia, and they train knights to protect the land. In this story, Link and Zelda are childhood friends, but it always hints at something more between them, never showing them as in a relationship, but always making it clear that they mean everything to each other, and the idea of more than friendship between them is always on show. While out flying together, Zelda is flung from her Loftwing by a storm and falls below the clouds, and Link must head to the grounds below to save her. First though, he is guided by Hylia's robot-like assistant Fi to claim a mysterious weapon known as the Goddess Sword, a weapon she created to aid her chosen hero. From here, Link traverses the land alongside Fi, searching for Zelda, narrowly missing her every time and being delayed in his journey frequently by the Demon King's henchman, Girahim. A jester demon guy, I suppose. He's dramatic, flamboyant, and ultimately just downright creepy. But all of this comes together to make him such a memorable villain. He pursues Zelda in an attempt to use her goddess powers to revive Demise, but is always foiled by Link and Zelda's bodyguard, Impa, who appears to be one of the first of the Sheikah tribe. So there's a lot more story to get things going here than previous Zeldas. I mentioned in my Twilight Princess video how I felt it was the worst opening in the series, but that I couldn't remember how bad Skyward Swords was. Well, I can confirm that Twilight Princess, at least for me, still has the worst in the series. This opening is much better, one of the best in the series even. It establishes characters and the world much quicker and more interestingly than Twilight Princess did, and you can be heading towards your first dungeon within about 45 minutes compared to over 2 hours. With Skyward Sword, Nintendo took the premise of telling the first story in the timeline very seriously, and created pretty much the most in-depth tale in the series. Link still doesn't talk here, but he has a lot of expressions and his care for Zelda is clearly on display. Zelda is much more fleshed out than usual too, although maybe not quite as much as Spirit Tracks, simply because she's not in this game as much, but we see that she is much more playful than usual. Perhaps too playful, considering she nearly kills Link. Twice. But by not being burdened by the weight of being part of a royal family, she's able to be a lot more characterful. And even when she does awaken as the goddess Hylia, she still has a more personal relationship with Link and more character than in most of the games. Overall, the relationship between Link and Zelda is the highlight of this game's story for me, even though the rest of the story is also incredibly strong here. Before we cover that though, we need to go over that pesky gameplay. You see, Nintendo didn't want to just change up the story for a Zelda game, but the gameplay as well. And for me, this is where the game has some issues. Up until Skyward Sword, most of the games in the series had followed a formula of giving you an open world to explore and discover the different dungeons and inhabitants within, with generally some light puzzling or side quests in between. Skyward Sword though more plays like one entire game-long dungeon. There is an overworld, sort of, but it's more like a 3D Mario game hub world with different entrances to the core areas. You fly around on a loft wing above the clouds, fully motion controlled of course, and you can somewhat explore tiny little islands. Nothing to the scale of even the smallest islands in Wind Waker, but it's a similar idea. Beyond that though, there are only 3 areas to the whole game. A forest area, a lava-riddled mountain, and a desert. If you think that's quite light on biomes for a Zelda game, well that's because it very much is. These areas are also not particularly big. They cram a lot into small areas, but they aren't really very interesting to explore beyond the areas you have to go to for the story. Instead, they are more like dungeons where you have to complete puzzles and fight enemies to move through them, to then come up to an actual dungeon. Now, don't get me wrong, the puzzle design in each of these areas and the game's 7 dungeons are frankly some of the best in the franchise, and how they utilise the fairly small pool of items is done very well by making each of them get used frequently and in multiple ways. But ultimately the problem with this design is it's not what most Zelda fans are here for. Sure, we all enjoy the dungeons, but with very little open world to explore, and the one that is there is, well, frankly boring, then the constant flow of puzzles and dungeons is never broken up, and the flow of the game just becomes too stagnant. The overworld sky area is even pointless to explore, as it's only worth going to marked islands on the map, either for story reasons, or for when you hit a goddess cube on the ground and make an optional treasure chest appear on one. Flying around is a fun idea with intuitive controls, but when there is literally nothing to do between the islands, and they themselves have nothing interesting to discover, it just becomes tedious and boring flying around this big empty sky. None of the treasures in the sky are required or particularly exciting either, making them more of a dull detour than an in-depth side quest. Ultimately, the main issue with Skyward Sword is that it's not trying to be a traditional Zelda, which to be fair is what the developers set out to do, to break the conventions of Zelda. But what they created instead was more along the lines of a Metroid game, a smaller, more puzzle-focused map to traverse that you open up more sections of as you progress. That works extremely well for Metroid, but for me, when it comes to a Zelda game, it feels that Skyward Sword has something missing. And that appears to be what a lot of other players felt as well. I noticed it less when I first played the Wii version, but in my 2 HD version playthroughs, it became painfully clear what the issue was, that by the halfway point of the story, the world was starting to repeat. Now to be clear, this is not to say that I don't like Skyward Sword. However, the overall theming is quite dull, probably held back by the limitations of the 3 biomes. Out of the 7 dungeons, there are only 3 different themes or looks to them, and the 7th one, which is particularly great from a puzzle perspective with shifting rooms across the dungeon, is sadly just those 3 themes blended across a singular dungeon. There is some standout moments though, such as a eerie underground section infected with zombie bokoblins, or the absolutely fantastically used time stones in the desert biome, which create an area around them that is set centuries in the past. This allows for a particularly fun scenario of turning a desert into an ocean. Ultimately, the issues that come with having the whole game be continuous puzzles though, is that the dungeons and the more open areas completely blend together, which itself doesn't make them any less fun, but it does make the overall feel and pacing of Skyward Sword ultimately less enjoyable than previous games. Another side effect of only having these 3 biomes is that the game repeats itself quite a lot. After you visit the 3 areas once and do the first 3 dungeons, you then go back to them again and do 3 more very similar looking dungeons. Once you do those 3 dungeons, you then return to each of those 3 areas again, slightly modified, but still ultimately the same area that you had mostly explored 2/3 of the game ago, and do yet more puzzles. I feel Nintendo made some of the best puzzles Zelda has to offer here, but they made the mistake of thinking that the in-between parts from the dungeons and the fun explorable world was not needed. They were sadly wrong, which they seem to have realised and in many ways overcorrected for in the next 3D title with Breath of the Wild, a game all about the open world, but with dungeons being an afterthought. With Nintendo needing to pack so much into these areas as well to create a 25+ hour game, it leaves little room for side quests. There are only a handful across the whole game, and with most of them being on the small Skyloft area, there is little variety either, with most of them just being fetch quests. There are some funny ones, such as the return of the creepy toilet hand from Majora's Mask, which is now in love with one of the knights in training, and another one of having to help a vampire-like monster to regain his humanity. But beyond that, there are hardly any side quests to mention, and this appears to be because of the new upgrade system. In other Zelda games, if you want to increase your capacity on bombs or arrows, find different shields or weapons or additional heart pieces, you have to go out into the world and complete a side quest to unlock them. With Skyward Sword though, you just have to find randomly dropped items around the game and use them to buy upgrades. It's a system that was showcased as being new to the series, but in reality it's the same old system, just streamlined by removing the quest to get those items. Even heart pieces are less fun to find, as you just need to strike a goddess cube on the surface and then fly to open the treasure chest in the sky. And there's little to no puzzles to get to them at all. It is interesting to see a few different shields and how your items upgrade, but when it's simply done by collecting randomly found items throughout the game, such as bugs or monster parts, the quest to receive the reward is ultimately dull. And since none of these upgrades are required, it becomes a question of if the rewards are even worth the tedious hunt for items. This streamlining of gameplay sadly does not extend to the tutorialization here. The HD version did improve on things, shortening the opening and removing forced tutorials, and it toned down feed interrupting. But sadly, it was not enough. One of the most annoying is when you reach low health and the usual annoying beeping sound kicks in. This can happen a lot on hero mode, which is how I played, where once again, no hearts appear. But this time you get an extra beeping sound on top of that from Fi, who continuously beeps at you until you replenish your health or acknowledge her notification. Fi also frequently pops up during the game to either explain something blatantly obvious to you, or to repeat what just happened in a cutscene. I still found her annoying in the HD version, and ultimately, she doesn't really add anything of value to the game beyond some story segments. She's an interesting design and adds lots of lore to the series, but is definitely one of the weaker companions in Zelda. Otherwise, there is thankfully some strong characters on display here. There's the goofball Grouse, another Skyloft inhabitant who likes to bully Link, but is in love with Zelda. He's a fan favourite with his over-the-top expressions and larger-than-life personality. He also creates one of the funniest moments in the series, and although he seems one note at first, he actually develops more than pretty much any other character in the game. He also has the best yet most ridiculous hairdo of all time, which helps him to create a lot of humour and heart in the second half of the story. Other characters get significantly less screen time, but many of them are still memorable, such as the return of Beedle, who now runs a flying shop that he has to pedal to keep moving. If you don't buy from him, he will happily drop you into the void for wasting his time. Or there's the helper robot Scrapper, who is madly in love with Fi, but treats Link like a third wheel, repeatedly saying he's in the way and calling him Mr. Shortpants. As for the rest of the story, the second half continues to be one of the best in the series. Seeing how Link takes the Goddess Sword and forges it into the Master Sword, the most iconic weapon in the series, is great to see. Forged through flames and trials across the story, we also see how Link is blessed with power, wisdom and courage to allow him to obtain the Triforce. I also find it great how Link's motivation to do all of this comes from his love for Zelda. Unlike most other games in the series, Link has a real motivation here to go on this adventure. Zelda also has her own quest of regaining her memories of Hylia alongside her bodyguard, Impa. Once she does, she travels back in time to a point shortly after Demise is sealed by Hylia. She must stay there sealed away for generations to prevent him from coming back. When Link goes back and finds out this is happening, the scene that plays out is one of the most emotional moments in the series, and is not only well written, but is well acted as well. Then of course is the ending, where Demise is destroyed in the current day by the Triforce, but is revived in the past by Girahim. After you defeat Demise in a climatic final battle, he curses Link, Zelda, and even himself to repeat a cycle of battle between the three of them forever, setting up the future of the entire timeline and giving lore as to why Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf are always fated to battle. Speaking of battles, the bosses in this game are some of the best in the franchise. But let's get the bad one out of the way first. The Imprisoned Battle. You have to battle a giant monster that is trying to destroy the sealed grounds to awaken Demise. But the battle is fairly dull and annoying. All you have to do is run around by his feet to chop up his toes to knock him down and drive a ceiling spike back into its head. You do this 3 times and the battle's over. It doesn't sound too bad until you find out you have to do it 3 more times across the game, and each battle is just a slightly harder version of the previous one. These battles aren't quite as tedious as a lot of discourse online would lead you to believe, but Nintendo definitely could have come up with much more interesting battles to replace these. Other bosses in the game though are fantastic. Girahim, the Jester Demon guy I mentioned, is the first boss in the game and shows off the motion controls perfectly. With needing to hit him at specific angles to do damage, he keeps you on your toes by teleporting around, changing up his tactics, and even stealing your sword on occasion. You fight him 2 more times throughout the game, and each battle is fun, challenging, and different from the previous one. Other highlights include, well, pretty much all of the bosses frankly, but the main ones for me are the giant Kraken battle at sea, the giant 4-armed sword-wielding armor monster, and of course, the fantastic last boss with Demise. A dramatic and tough one-on-one sword fight with a towering demon, who carries a sword that looks like the Anti-Master Sword, which is made of Girahim himself. The music is fantastic, and the setting, in what appears to be the Sacred Realm from Ocarina of Time, is also incredible. When the second half of the battle begins, the music becomes more dramatic, the lightning starts, and you have to fire back sword strikes of lightning while defending against Demise's own. It's amazing. Little touches such as Demise charging you if you try to heal also add a lot of drama and difficulty to the battle. It ends with an absolutely beautifully dramatic jump into the air to get the Master Sword charged with lightning before striking Demise down in one final stab to the chest. It's one of the most dramatic and difficult last bosses in the series, and I love every second of it. Finally, there's the presentation, and this is a bit of an odd one to review. The original game on the Wii I personally found to not look particularly great. Colours were washed out, it was blurry, and it was quite basic looking even for a Wii game. But the HD version on Switch looks absolutely beautiful. Bright, vibrant colours and lighting across the whole game, with watercolour style backgrounds and textures, give it a very unique look. It mixes Twilight Princess with Wind Waker to give more realistic looking characters, but with all the colour and style of that cartoony world. It also runs at 1080p 60fps on the HD version, which is a first for the 3D style of Zelda games, and is currently the only game in the series that officially runs at 60fps outside of the top-down view games. This in turn also makes the motion controls smoother on the Switch as well. There is one complaint I have on the visuals though, which is also because of a missing mechanic. There is no day-night cycle. You can switch Skyloft to night, but there is no visiting the ground at any point, and there is no flying through the air either. The game looks amazing at night as well, so it's such a shame the game is lacking a day-night cycle. Then there's the music. For the first time in the series, we get a fully orchestrated soundtrack, and when this was announced, I was very excited for what we could get. After how amazing Super Mario Galaxy soundtrack was, my expectations were high. Sadly though, I set them too high, as although the music in Skyward Sword is technically good, it's not particularly memorable to me. The main theme is fantastic, but it only plays during the credits, and a variant of it plays throughout the game during some cutscenes. There's a few other highlights such as Fi's theme, and some of the bosses have amazing music, but the rest to me is pretty forgettable. I don't really like the overworld theme that much either. It's not terrible or anything, and technically it's a good song, but it just didn't give me the same feeling of adventure as the themes from Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, or Spirit Tracks, or really any other game in the series, despite being fully orchestrated. Overall, the best way I can put it is that it just didn't capture me in the same way as other games have. However, I had to come and record this line specifically while I was editing the video because the music really started to grow on me. There were some amazing songs in this game that really fit the overall theme, especially the end credits theme, which is one of the best in the franchise. Moving on from the music, there is once again the issue of the lack of voice acting. Twilight Princess, which released 5 years prior, was behind the times for not having it. but Skyward Sword just seems silly without it. It's very cinematic, with several emotional and dramatic scenes that would have been massively improved on with some strong voice acting. As with Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword is not ruined by its lack of voice acting, but it's definitely harmed by it. Skyward Sword was a big step into a more cinematic and in-depth story on the series, but with the lack of voice acting, it can feel out of date in several places. And since a lot of characters make frequent sounds, it seems odd that Nintendo didn't just make this their first fully voiced title in the series. So overall, how does Skyward Sword hold up 13 years after its original release? Well, it's a bag of mixed feelings for me. First off, as with any game in this series, it's still incredible overall. It has an amazing story, and gameplay that contains some of the best battles and puzzles in the series. It's also beautifully presented across its visuals and music, even if the latter isn't quite to my style. However, the developer's decision to experiment here does bring with it some issues. On the one hand, it is definitely harmed by its lack of an open world, and its over-reliance on puzzles to pad out the gameplay can make its pacing feel very off in places. On the other hand though, it brought in mechanics that, although were not great here, such as the stamina wheel and the crafting system, did pave the way for much more enjoyable versions of them with the next 3D title. Their experimentation also made some great changes as well. I personally loved the motion controls here, and the series' first attempt at a more dramatic, personal and emotional story was definitely a success, even if Nintendo should have gone further by adding full voice acting to make the drama land so much more with the audience. Overall though, it's still a fantastic title. It attempted something new for the series and paved the way for its future in the long run. It tried something bold with its controls in a way that mostly paid off in my opinion, and it created some of the best lore in the series that would go on to affect the entire timeline. It may not be the best Zelda game you can play, but it is one of the most essential in the franchise for any fan out there. So Skyward Sword is what you get from Zelda when it hits its 25th anniversary. It's weird that the series got orchestras, books and a full game, whereas Mario got a re-release of Super Mario All-Stars on a disc. Then again, for Zelda's 35th anniversary, we got nothing but a Game & Watch. Whereas Mario got, I suppose, just Super Mario All-Stars again, but this time for the 3D titles. Anyway, 13 years beyond its release, Skyward Sword is still a fantastic game to play. Sure, I've got some negative things to say on it, and I think rightly so. The game certainly makes mistakes in its design, but the beautiful story, art style and puzzle design is some of the best available in any game franchise, not just in Zelda. The 3D titles would be very different from this point forward, but before we get into that, we have a couple more to play through. Next time the series gets into a different kind of 3D, with The Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds, using the original map and the same general game design, but with a new twist that would help to push the franchise towards its next big evolution. Also, it has one of the best uses of 3D on the system. I'll catch you next time for the World of Lorule. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Phil, and I'm the creator of the Pixel Tavern. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you haven't already, please check out my other videos with many more around Zelda and beyond, already available and still to come. Please subscribe to the Pixel Tavern and click the bell icon to stay notified of any future releases. Click the like button and leave a comment on your thoughts of Skyward Sword. What did you think of the one-to-one motion controls? Were you a fan of the soundtrack? And would you want to see full motion controls return to the franchise someday? As usual, if you want to see more of my videos, there are more on screen now. But until the next video everyone, thank you very much for watching.